This is in Texas? Holy cow. Okay. Okay. You just pond up and, yep. So many fields do that. I've got some guys there's farmers in Aberdeen, Idaho that they believe they can't run pivots because, pivot puts too much water on or soil won't take it. It's just the wrong texture. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with your texture, guys. Yeah. I didn't either when I was a fertilizer salesman. I just thought, well, this is how we do it. But then you start researching a little bit. And yeah, yeah. Colorado. Yeah. Is this Brendan Rocky?
Never mind.
No, go on though.
This presentation is really enlightening.
Yeah.
I don't have any science. I'm a scientist, so
Yeah.
I don't have any science to back it, but he does. It's just not some geeky science
Yeah.
coming out there.
Yep.
You can see it in the pictures.
Yep.
Day, you go, wow, this makes a lot of sense what he's doing with all this regenerative ag approach and
Yeah.
multiple crops within a pivot. I don't know if you've seen his pictures where the pivots sunk down and then he's built it with OM.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really enlightening.
It is. It is. Yeah. No, I know everybody wants, like, people that I work with want data, and I'm like, I don't care about the data. Just look at the effects that we're having. You can see it. Yeah. Yep. What time is it? Yeah, okay. Perfect. I like this group. It's intimate. All right. So I got to hold this close, huh? All right. So my name is Brad Johnson. Here to present on what we're doing in Idaho. So I grew up in northern Idaho in the Palouse region. If anybody's familiar with the Palouse region, it's super steep, hilly, erodes very well. Dad started no-tilling in the 80s. It wasn't for erosion. He was just trying to figure out a better way to rotate bluegrass fields out. Every time we plowed those, we had these huge clods, and we'd have to work it 5 or 6 times to get those down. So he started no-tilling, and then we didn't realize that our ditches would go away. So that was my aha moment as a kid. I was like, holy cow, this is how we should be farming. But sadly, Dad stopped farming in 1990. That next year, I headed off to college at University of Idaho, where I got a degree in plant soil science. Let's see, where was I going after that? And I've worked in Twin Falls, Idaho for several years. Worked for a friend on his no-till farm back in the Palouse in the early 2000s. And then after I met my wife, she grew up in Salmon, Idaho on a cattle ranch, so we moved to Salmon, ran cows with her folks until they retired. And that's when we decided to move to Idaho Falls, where I went to work as a crop consultant salesman for a large retailer. And my wife finished her master's, and now she's a marriage counselor. The consulting, that was not my gig. I kept promoting these practices, and my boss kept looking at me and thinking, dude, with all these weird practices you're talking about, your sales really are horrible. And that was kind of another aha moment for me. Selling products that farmers didn't really necessarily need was not where I wanted to go. So I got out of that. TNC told me, or I heard about this job coming up with TNC, Nature Conservancy. So now I am the Agriculture Strategy Manager for the Idaho chapter of the Nature Conservancy. My title is just a fancy way of saying I am a conservation agronomist or a regenerative ag agronomist or some dude that runs around Idaho teaching people soil health practices. Yeah, I'm not following my script, so luckily there's not that many people in here. Anyway, here's my contact information. If anybody wants to call me or email me, feel free. That's part of my job is anytime somebody calls, I'm here to answer questions. If I don't know the answer, then I will figure it out. So we'll get into this a little bit more. This is my own quote. Agriculture is changing. With input costs rising, climate's changing, and rural areas shrinking. We just can't continue to farm like we have in the past. TNC and soil health. TNC believes that soil health will improve agriculture producers' bottom lines. Input costs can be drastically reduced when we have a healthy soil that can feed crops more efficiently, reducing the need for added inputs in fertility, and that in turn helps rural economies. We believe soil health practices reduce or even eliminate wind and water erosion that pollutes our waterways and our air. Soil health practices increase water infiltration and water holding capacities of our soil, reducing the need for irrigation so we can limit the water we're taking out of the rivers. And it also increases yields on dryland farms, which goes back to helping rural economies. Soil health can and will eventually lead to more healthy, nutrient-dense food. I'm not saying the farmers are doing things wrong. We as producers and agronomists, we've been doing it how we've been taught for the last 70 years. Universities have taught us this. Practices have taught us our old practices. We just know of a better way to do it now that can be better for everybody. TNC's Healthy Soils Resilient Water Initiative. We're helping with financial risk mitigation. We've got a demonstration farm in Twin Falls, Idaho, and then just doing some education and outreach. With our financial risk mitigation program, what we mean by that, what we're doing there is we'll enter into an agreement with farmers that want to work with us. When they implement these practices, we realize that there is some inherent risk in that, and it's not because the practices are bad, it's just that learning curve is tough. So we know that they're quite possibly going to lose some income. So we can backstop some of those losses due to the practices and that steep learning curve. This demonstration farm, it's in Twin Falls, Idaho. Farmer by the name of Todd Ballard agreed to lease us 30 acres. He still owns it. He gets the crop. He gets the profit from the crop. He and I work together in figuring out how to grow those crops and what crops to grow. And then we tell our story together through field days, tours, social media, any way we can get our story out. And it's been a great deal. We're having fun with that farm. We just started last year, so we're not really getting into too many practices. We are working on another demonstration farm in eastern Idaho that will focus on potatoes and that wind erosion corridor that I was talking about to try to stop the dust bowls and not close the freeway anymore. I wish I could move that more. Anyway, I'll figure this out. I'll just talk as I go. In my presentation, I'll talk about mindset. And this is a big piece of that. This comes from Rick Clark. I'm sure you guys have heard of Rick Clark. He farms 7,000 acres in Indiana, and it's all regenerative. It's kind of cool. He didn't, from what I gather, I've never talked to him, but from what I gather, he wasn't planning on going organic, but the land told him to go organic because he doesn't need fertilizer anymore. He doesn't spray anymore because he's fixed his soil. But anyway, I love this quote because he decided he needed to take the negativity out of his vocabulary. Instead of the word failure, he likes an outcome I did not expect, and he wants to learn from those outcomes. I think everybody going down this road needs to have that mindset that I didn't fail, it didn't work out like I thought it would, and let's figure out why it didn't work out. So with that, let's get into some of our practices that we're doing in Idaho. So this is the Twin Falls demonstration farm, Todd Ballard's farm. We're trying to implement all 5 soil health practices. It has been no-till for the last 4 years. We've planted cover crops. We had some sheep come in to graze this fall. However, Twin Falls got some snow, got cold, or warm, and then cold, so that snow is crusted pretty bad and the sheep can get through it. We're trying to get some cattle in there now because cows will be able to break through that snow crust. So prior to us having this 30 acres, it was in alfalfa. That was in 2018. 2018, he put sugar beets in, and that's the last time it's seen any tillage. 2019, it was a malt barley crop with a cover crop planted afterwards. And then in 2020, we no-tilled beans into it. Todd did. I was there helping him, but we weren't demonstration farm yet. No-tilled beans into it. We didn't get a cover crop planted that year just due to we didn't plan well enough for it. 2021, we went back into malt barley, and this time we did get a cover crop planted, probably a day, 2 days after harvest. The barley this year went about 120 bushels to the acre, which is a little bit lower than his usual yield. Part of that is, as you can see in that top picture, I put that in there just to show that residue management, and that is really poor residue management. We need to get that straw spread out more. That was our biggest deterrent in our barley crop this year. Of course, this is not the residue we planted into. I just put that there to show an example. I'll get into my hopes and dreams of the demonstration farm and how I'm going to fix that if I have the budget that I want. But anyway, with this year we did plant those cover crops, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today as the demonstration farm goes, and most of those cover crops that we planted. This winter forage mix, this was a good one. The winter peas were our legume component, giving us the nitrogen, but the oats, the barley, and the wheat, they're that big fibrous root that Jimmy was talking about, that it helps break up that hard pan a little bit and gets those roots throughout. Of course, our rutabaga and our turnips, those are really breaking up that hard pan with those roots. Anyway, this winter forage mix, super impressed. It grew really well. It had great biomass. It was helping our soil quite a bit. The second one, the budget mix, not so much my favorite one. With just 2 species, it just wasn't enough. This buckwheat didn't emerge. I think we planted it a little too deep. So with that, all we had was triticale in there that mixed in with the volunteer barley. So we're basically kind of back to a monoculture. If you're going to plant cover crops, some people say start out small. I feel it's actually easier to start out with more species because you always have something that will germinate and make it. Where this budget mix, we just didn't have anything really there to speak of. The next one, this pollinator blend. Yep, it's working. Okay. This pollinator blend was by far my favorite one. We had a couple different legumes in there. The Master White Mustard has given us some soil health benefits. It's given off some glycosinolates that are helping some of those bad organisms in the soil. The white clover, again, is another legume. Common vetch and the crimson clover, all legumes producing nitrogen. As we dug up the roots this fall, they were nodulating really, really well. But by far, my favorite is this Phacelia. You can see the mycorrhizal fungi coming off the roots in that. You've got that flower. A lot of these actually have flowers that are bringing in those beneficial insects. That was a wonderful mix. I would plant that over the whole farm if I could. The soil compaction mix was good also. We only had that one legume in there, so I wish there was a little bit more of that. The triticale, again, has given us that fibrous root. The radish, everybody knows what radish will do for you. It was also, did well, grew well. We had a lot of biomass, but the roots down in the soil are what I'm really concerned with. And they were phenomenal as well. Yes? Well, I could. I only have 30 acres of this farm. That's what I meant by that, sorry. Good question. I liked the pollinator more because of those flowers, bringing in those beneficial insects. That other one did well, and especially if you're going to graze it, that other one did really well. Yes, for sure. For me, in Idaho, because our soils are in poor enough shape that we have a lot of insect troubles. And so for me, that pollinator blend is going to bring in more of your beneficials. That earlier grazing mix is wonderful if you want to graze it, but it's not helping you bring in those beneficial insects. That's my thinking. Plus the flowers are cool. Yeah, all of these did, other than that second one. If we wouldn't have had that volunteer barley, we wouldn't have had much soil armor. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about maybe planting these in strips?
That's what we did. Sorry, I should have mentioned that in here. We did plant, there were 7 different strips out through the field so that we could compare the different species.
So for real world
Oh,
strips. So you sort of have
I guess you could. I guess you could if you wanted to test them out. There'd be really no practical reason in the field. Because, I mean, when you set your goals for your cover crop, you're never going to have separate goals in strips out in the field. And you can tailor these to do what you want a little bit. This one I couldn't. These were donated to us from Simplot, and they kind of dictated what I planted, so I just worked with what they sent me. You had a question?
So I'll just tell you from experience, like with your pollinator growing, and you get right about what it's for. Is you can really, like I use it for the predator species.
Yeah.
Bugs. And I think one of the NRCS programs, why we did it, is would actually just plant our field borders.
Mm-hmm.
Pollinators, because of the idea then you're getting, just because you're also trying to get production,
Yeah.
but you're also spreading out those predator species throughout the field with the intention of.
So you put all that land with perimeter, and then inside you're raising them.
Well, I've been doing it in my head.
Yeah. Well,
The guy up in Idaho talked about it about 6 or 7 years ago, tree farm. And that's what he'd actually do is every 8 or 10
so
potato roll.
so that wouldn't have been a guy in Idaho. That was Brendan Rocky in Colorado, probably. Yeah.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
That's
I wished he was in Idaho.
a cool idea, because he related it to like you think you're meat and potatoes kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is that they gotta have, they eat the pollen, but they also eat the bugs.
Yep.
And so you skip them out.
Yep.
And that's how you get an even distribution.
So Brendan has been able to almost eradicate Colorado potato beetle in his potatoes by doing that.
Yeah.
And it's fabulous.
So, sorry, I want to follow up on your hay. So putting that around the perimeter, is that going to make a significant advantage here? You go with the pressure?
I think so.
I've had problems with the drought getting the steak,
Oh,
but I think it will.
Yeah.
I still find them.
If you're
And they're good cover crops regardless.
Yeah. If you're not trying to market your hay to a dairy and you don't care about that top quality hay and you can have some extra species in your alfalfa, just plant them out in your alfalfa field. I don't see any problem with that.
And I think you just gotta pay attention to timing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, alfalfa is a lot of times it's in the fall area, but most of it's cut
Yeah, before it flowers. And that's true. You'd never get the flowers in this if you're cutting it multiple times.
Timing.
Yeah. So that's just a picture of the pollinator species. Luckily, we got a frost right at the right time, so all that barley didn't go. It was 2 seed, but nothing was viable, thankfully. The other one was a soil health #1, and it worked as well, too. I'm not going to get too much into it because we're starting to get long on time. We had the soil health #2, and the only difference was it had rye in it. And I just want to play with rye because everybody's scared of it in Idaho. And I want to see how that works. Control Master, if anybody's got nematode issues, that one works pretty well. Jed, you've got one of those, I believe. Yeah. Well, I won't say anything because there's more people online than here, but we'll talk later. On the farm, we had NRCS come out and do the rainfall simulator, and our soils performed kind of like we thought we would. We took some samples out of a moldboard plowed cornfield next to us, and it overland flow, no infiltration, so it worked just like you would think it would. So earlier I mentioned the things, if I had an unlimited budget, that I would fix. This grain drill, it works, but we don't have a very good closing system on it, and I would like to get a single disc drill that actually closes the trench a little bit better. But the biggest thing that I want, and I should have flipped these slides, but that stripper header would erase our residue management issues. And it'd be cheaper than buying a new combine that can actually spread the straw. The other part is that stubble, when it's long, tall, and attached to the soil, you can plant through that way easier than you can if it's laying flat on the ground. It drags, it hairpins. Everybody's like, well, that'll hairpin too. It's like, yeah, actually, for whatever reason, it just works better. So, no, I've run a couple for my wife's uncle in Colorado for the last several summers, and there's no loss. If you learn how to set them up right, they work phenomenal.
Online, they were just asking, could you repeat the questions in the room?
Oh.
Could you answer them so they could hear?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I forget about the people online. So anyway, that's one thing I'd change on the demonstration farm if I could. And back to, just want to thank Simplot, NRCS, and Ballard Farms for this opportunity to have this demonstration farm. This one, I'll go through it quick. All of these practices that we tried here were taken out by Mother Nature this summer. His water was shut off in June right at grain fill. And it just, we couldn't take it to yield because Mother Nature was our limiting factor. This is up in Peekaboo, Idaho, so it's pretty high elevation, short growing season. We did a starter fertilizer rate trial. We did see a difference in that. The zero rate didn't work as well. The naked seed just means it wasn't treated with fungicide. And next year, this farmer won't treat anything because that actually worked better than the treated seed. It emerged faster, more uniform. Those microbes coming off the seed that we're bringing in the fertilizer and making that available, that's a real thing. I was really skeptical. I wanted to do it on the demonstration farm, and I was scared to. But after watching this farmer do it, I think it works. The clover underseeding, what he did there is he just planted in some clover, I can't remember the variety of it, underneath his barley. And it was working well, as you can see in that top picture. There's the clover there. Next year we would plant a little more, increase our seeding rate. We just didn't have enough in there, but I'll be curious to see this spring if it's still there, if it survived the drought.
On starter fertilizer rate testing, you said that the zero starter was noticeably different.
Yep.
From there, did you find it
Third.
a little bit's kind of just all you need, or?
Third, 2/3 and full rate in just our limited time that we could watch it before the water was gone. We didn't see much of a difference. Now, we might have in the yield at the end had we checked, but Mother Nature took care of that for us. Did you sell Pat Purdy this clover seed, Jed? Was it white lilac or? It was a short growing clover. I was excited to watch it work, but again, we didn't get to. The strip till sugar beets, we actually did pretty well. We were scared throughout the year. This farmer, it was wheat the year before. He let the wheat regrow, and then we just strip tilled into it in the spring. That gave us some issues. If I was going to strip till, I'd do it in the fall and let those strips settle in a little bit because the planter was struggling to follow those rows. Also, I would plant a real cover crop because this, as you can see in the picture, it was patchy. And every time we'd go into a clear area and then back to a high residue area, it just kind of messed with the strip till and the flow of the soil in that strip tiller. But we did get, we reduced our soil disturbance. We had fewer trips over the field, and we did have some water savings. But that lower picture, those beets don't look good. They were shaded out. Our glyphosate program didn't work very well this summer due to that hot, dry summer that Idaho had, or everybody had. So I was a little skeptical on this one. But in the end, we yielded 2 ton per acre more. Our sugars were higher. I don't think the juice purity makes a difference on their income, but I just thought it was interesting that was even better. They are paid on tonnage and sugar. So he did better with his sugar beets this year because of with the strip till. Now we'll try it again next year and see. I think he did plant a cover crop this fall, so we should have more uniform conditions to strip till into. We tried to strip this fall, but as some of the Idaho guys know, it was a super wet fall and he didn't get it done. The cool thing that happened with that wet harvest, though, he called me one day panicking. They were behind schedule. Rained again, another inch and a half, and they couldn't dig. But we went and tried the strip till field, and we were actually able to dig that field where he couldn't dig the other stuff. We had that residue on top and all that and held the equipment up. So that was, to me, that was a win-win, I thought. Yield was better. No-till organic, this one was ugly. Started in 2020. They planted this rye cover crop fall of 19, grew it up, and it was thick. It looked good. They roller crimped it in the spring to plant no-till pinto beans into it. And as you can see in that bottom picture, we had more rye than we had beans growing. We thought we waited long enough. It was at anthesis, but I think we had a lot of understory that was not there yet, so that didn't terminate. Plus, we watered it a lot ahead of time and after, and I think that just kept those crowns way too healthy, and they didn't terminate like we wanted. That's their roller crimper that they built. TNC has one in Idaho. If anybody wants to use one, let me know. I can bring it down to Utah. They built their own just for timing purposes, and they didn't like the one I bought. Anyway, outcomes in 2020 were ugly. Idaho, I don't know what, these guys are organics. That 2,500 pounds an acre probably isn't accurate for them. But as you can see, our beans didn't yield worth a darn. They were able to sell that 346 pounds of rye for a little added income. So that helped. And TNC was there to backstop their losses so they could continue farming. 2021, we did a few things differently. They did anyway. Let the rye go till soft dough. So we did have way better termination on the rye this time. Excuse me. The rye that we roller crimped this time was regrowth from the previous year. That's how bad that was. They dried it down a little bit more before and after crimping. I think that helped. And this time they planted it with a 30-inch row planter. Those rows, don't look at those, they're pretty ugly. Due to they wanted 15-inch rows, so they planted it twice without GPS. So anyway, it was way better this year. I didn't have the yield data in here because I just got it yesterday, but they did make 1,500 pounds to the acre this year, so it was considerably better than last year. I think this can work. We just got to play with it some more. We're going to give the field. We don't want to go beans 3 years in a row, so this next year, they did plant a triticale. We'll green chop that, plant in a worm season mix, and graze that, and then we'll go back to a winter cover crop that we can roller crimp again and plant dryable beans. They are trying different varieties to see which variety works the best in this. I think part of our issue is the epigenetics of the seed. All of our seed is grown in perfect conditions with no residue, and those seeds come out of the ground and go. It doesn't have the energy to get through the soil and that thick layer that we have there. So I think that's part of the issue. They're working with the breeder to finally try to fix that, hopefully. This is by far my favorite project we've worked on, managing crops for grazing. This guy farms in Grandview, Idaho. He works heavily with a grass-fed beef co-op in Idaho. Everything he does has to have a grazing component. All of his cash crops, everything. I mean, he planted radishes into a timothy field this fall just for the grazing. He planted some oats this year in February just for some spring grazing. In this field, it was a timothy hay field. It's about 4 to 5 years old, needed to rotate it out. It's an 84-acre pivot. And so 2020, he took his first cutting of timothy off in June, no-tilled in, alternating rows of corn and peas. He had some beans because we didn't have enough pea seed. Marlon was there one day and noticed that corn with the peas was a foot taller than with the beans. That worked pretty well. There's the rows there. It doesn't look like much right there, but they grazed on that. They had 390 grazing days, I think. So he took that first cutting of timothy. It yielded 4.5 tons the acre. He sold that for $300 a ton to an export market, then turned around and grazed it for another $300 an acre that fall. So that was, I mean, he did well on that field. The income was good. But we compared that with another field next door, right across the fence, where he terminated the Timothy and no-tilled the corn in. We just wanted to compare the income levels of those. And of course, the straight corn that he harvested out yielded with income-wise, it did better income-wise. So for 2021, we wanted to mix those two things together. So we once again left that Timothy to grow. It's still there, and no-tilled in full season corn on May 10th, somewhere around there, May 11th. That's what it was. And let that grow, let everything grow up together. We were a little afraid that Timothy was going to outcompete the corn when the corn was young, so we sprayed it with a light rate of glyphosate just to knock it back a little bit, and then planted the corn. Throughout the summer, that Timothy just kind of sat there, didn't do much. But that bottom right picture is the corn stover with that Timothy coming up into it. Once that corn dried down and the sunlight got into the row, that Timothy took off. So this corn yielded 290 bushels to the acre. So great income on the corn, plus he's still grazing it today. Those cows, I haven't gotten any data from that yet to see how they're gaining on it, but I know the cattle guy is super happy with that one. This has been a pretty fun project to work on, and it works. He's got the diversity, he's got the living root all the time, he's not disturbing the soil. It's a pretty fun project, and this guy, so a little background on him, he grew up in Kansas, been in Idaho for 25 years, and his grandfather in Kansas kept telling him stories of the Dust Bowl and how they survived, and that's his driver for doing what he's doing in Idaho, because he won't let his farm get to that. The neighboring farm next door that was a potato field, on a windy day last spring, it buried his pump, this farmer's pump, because there was just no cover on the ground, and that windstorm moved a lot of dirt, and his never moved. So that's to him, that's a success. Where was I going? I thought I had another slide for that one. Anyway, next year we're going to do a 44-inch row corn on this and plant a diverse mix in between the rows and see if we can maintain corn yield and have even more grazing. So earlier I talked about mindset, and this was a super good, an excellent farmer that I worked with. He's already planting cover crops, doing all sorts of things, trying to minimize his tillage, and he knew that his next step was no-till corn. He's a wheat, corn, potatoes rotation. It's mixed up, but anyway, he does an excellent job of farming. Went to no-till. We came in to help him backstop the risk, and no-tilled in that corn, and it was a 40 bushel difference for him. This is pictures of the residue that we were working with. He had the perfect planter for it. But my point with this is the only thing we changed was we took the tillage out. We didn't change the planting dates. We didn't change the maturity length of corn, anything. So that soil was still pretty cold when we planted. It was conventional and no-till were very similar in temperature until the sun came out and it warmed up. And then the no-till fell off. The conventional just got way warmer, and that corn grew way better. So we lost 40 bushels on the no-till stuff, which to me wasn't a huge difference, but most farmers are super concerned about yield, and they don't look at cost savings of doing soil health practices and how much more their bottom line is affected. So he's quit doing this. He wants to move to strip till in a few years, but my whole point is just it's that mindset. It scared him, and he dropped out. Doesn't want to do it anymore. Had we looked at our outcome on that and thought, well, how can I change this to make it better? Let's go to a shorter season corn and plant 3 weeks later when the soil's warmer. Let's try to change things up instead of just going about how we always do it with just taking tillage out. That doesn't work very well in my book anyway.
Can you say more on the temperature? We're growing the creative rows, so there's warmer on it. Why is it warmer for the till?
Because the question is, why is it warmer on the conventional versus the no-till? As you can see in that picture, we had a ton of residue on there. It was 150 bushel wheat the year prior, cover crop planted. It was grazed, but there was just so much thatch there that didn't let the sun hit that. Yeah, and it goes back to water savings. That's why conventional systems use a little more water, is if we've got that cover, we don't have that solar radiation baking the water, or the moisture out of it. We're taking the E out of ET.
And what was the bushels left from what to what? Did you go from 60 to 20, or did it go from 320 to?
Gosh, I should have wrote that down. I know it was a 40 bushel difference, but it was like difference of 280 versus, yeah, something like that. I can't remember. What's corn usually yielding in American Falls, Jed? Yeah, so I mean, I did the numbers on it, and the income loss wasn't great because we saved a few passes with tillage equipment. But it's, yeah, I'm not bashing on the farmer. I just want to talk about that mindset that you can't just pull one thing out of your system. Yeah, it is. It's totally real.
Why would he be interested in trying to begin that relationship?
Well, so he's on some pretty hilly ground, and it erodes pretty badly when it rains. So a little story on that. And this isn't so much rain erosion, this story, but it's more pivot tracks and the water that runs on the pivot tracks. So every summer he sends his boys out to haul 2-string bales of straw out by hand to put in the pivot tracks. And his boys loved the no-till because they didn't haul a single bale out to that stuff. They were hauling bales all day long in the conventional stuff. And so that was his driver. He just wanted to reduce his erosion and improve his soil health more.
Typical, like for example, yesterday, I talked about no-tilling, the guy from Booth, the no-tilling corn and the trip cane. So it was different than this, but it was, cut the trip cane and no-till. I imagine the ground temperature is a little warmer when you put that in. Is this a long day corn, by the way?
Yeah, it was 110 day corn, something like that.
Are you typically going to see a yield drop when you go from no-till or direct till? Or is it guys, can you look at that the opposite? So no, I actually think that can be a yield.
Yeah. To me, the first couple of years, you're probably going to see yield hit just because you're trying to fix your soil and you're trying to work through issues like this. But after you figure it out and you heal your soil a little bit, I believe you'll see a yield increase. But that's just me being a huge proponent of no-till.
And so there's a loss in fixing the soil.
Not a loss, just a transition period. That, and like Jimmy was saying yesterday, soil's addicted to how we're working it, feeding it, and all that. When you take that away, it goes into a stress response. Kind of like if you were an alcoholic and took alcohol away. It twitches like human would. I mean, it doesn't obviously twitch, but you get my point. There is that, the soil's like, what the heck did you just do? I'm used to this way. Now we're doing it this way. So it takes some time for it to react in a positive way.
My thought is the biggest change is going to be the water savings. So in a drought condition, I would think something like this, you're not going to lose all that water.
Yep. He was able to,
Significant water savings aspect to this.
yeah.
And I was unaware of the yield. I don't think we talk enough about the yield losses and the challenges that get there from yield. We set false expectations for the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Rick Clark, he talks about sacrificing yield all day long for soil health. But his bottom line is better because he's been able to reduce his input costs so much. So I think in these programs, we have to quit talking yield. We have to stop, not comparing ourselves, but using yield as our quantifier of success. You got to look at the bottom line. Yield it matters, obviously, it does matter to a certain extent, but our bottom line is the biggest issue that we need to look at. You know, if I can get my soil biology built up to where I don't need as much synthetic inputs put on, then that's a win-win. if our yields are still comparable. I believe, anyway. So that's, I've already kind of gone into that one. Jed and Mike, you guys know this one. I just threw it in to fill time. So TNC bought this roller crimper, and we were super excited to use it. So we rolled down this triticale just to see if it'd work. And a couple of gentlemen in the crowd here had some seed, and NRCS agent had a drill. So we ended up planting it, rolling it and planting it that very same day. It didn't work very good. But this triticale was super thick. What did it yield? 25 ton to the acre of silage in the pit? So it just, I mean, I guess my point is rolling cover crops works, but it's got to be managed for that, not managed as a silage crop first. And roller crimping can't be an afterthought. Oh my gosh, we had, the grain drill got through it just perfectly. Yeah, we got the seed in the ground, it's just, it couldn't come through that super thick mat. Because we just, oh gosh, that guy standing out there in the field is 6'3". It was thick. Sorry, internet people, there's some people in the crowd that know about this. And then we did try some minimum till potatoes in Ryrie, Idaho. We just wanted to see if the planter would work. What they did with this crop, it was barley stubble. They ran their air seeder through it just to get the fertilizer in the ground, and then we planted it. There was no prior management to set it up for this. We did get potatoes to grow. The potato planter got into the ground, got the potatoes buried. We did have to dam or dike it the next day to close those rows a little bit more. The potatoes, they didn't yield that much worse than the normal crop. They were a little rougher. But my point with this is it kind of goes back to that corn. The only thing we did was cut the tillage out. Had we had a cover crop ahead of that, I think we could have mellowed that soil out. Maybe ran a ripper through the centers to give some space for those potatoes to grow. It was a fun project. I don't think this farmer will do it again. But I would like to do it again in Idaho if I possibly could and change a few things. Grow those cover crops and put out the pollinator species in a row to get those beneficial insects like the Colorado guy's doing. I just put these in to fill time. And we're about to the question and answer. This is a dude in Hamer, Idaho, that he just really was tired of his sand blowing by. All of his neighbors are conventional till, and every time the wind blows, I mean, this is like farming a beach in Hamer, and it blows badly. So he started no-tilling all of his grain. I just put it in because this is a guy that did it successfully. Those fertilizer openers in that top picture, he's had issues with those plugging. He's been through 3 different sets of fertilizer injection knives to see which one will go through the residue better. He called me one day when he was plugging up, so I went and rode his planter for a half a day just to see what was catching. It's an example of a farmer that saw a need, got tired of his wind erosion and saw a need to fix it, and he's figuring out how to do it on his farm. He's now added mustard into his rotation, so he's spreading out that rotation a little bit. And I will hopefully get him convinced to plant some cover crops after harvest this year, because that's his next step in his soil health journey. He's taken the tillage out. Now he just needs to get some cover crops to get that soil biology going to reduce his need for the inputs that he's got. And then his bottom line can be helped. This last slide is just my closing. These 2 pictures, the soil on the left is a sample I dug up in an area of Idaho. This field it's been organic for many, many years, and their only weed control tool is a disc. And you can see the plating in there. What do you think the water and the roots are going to do in that situation? Are they going to soak in? Are your roots going to go deep? No, they're going to go to the side, as is your water. It'll pond and pool, and like Jimmy says, he got all of his rain. These guys only get 20% of their rain. Soil on the right comes out of the demonstration farm that's had cover crops. You can see the nodules in there. I would much rather have that soil. It's going to produce way better for you. And that's just 1 year of cover crop that's changed that. I didn't dig in the soil before this cover crop. It was in pretty decent shape. It wasn't like that, but just goes to show, once we do this, your soils can start looking like that more. It'll take in your water, roots can go into it. You can reduce your input costs, stop your erosion. It's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's the way we should be farming. There's no reason to be pulling that disc several times a year, creating soils like that. So with that, we'll open it up to questions, and I thank you guys for coming in and listening to me ramble on up here. All the questions were asked during the presentation.
Is there a way to get to this cover crop area where you don't see a yield drop? Or you feel like that's almost a necessary part of the program?
Can you get to using cover crops and soil health without a yield drop in the first few years? Yes, I believe you can if you think it through first. You find a network of growers that are doing it and utilize their knowledge so that you don't make the same mistakes that they've made. I mean, that corn issue, I wholeheartedly believe we could have yielded just the same as a conventional had we changed a few management practices. The potatoes, I'm not sure about. That's a tougher issue to tackle because they are heavy tillage intensive. But on most farms, yeah, I think you can. You just have to, you come to these conferences and you talk to seed salesmen in the crowd that know their stuff and are very, very knowledgeable. They can tailor a cover crop species blend mix that will take care of your goals. You find a farmer that's been no-tilling and see what he uses, or the farmer that has figured out his residue management. That's the biggest key to no-till is residue management. Anytime you've got that thick layer of straw sitting on your soil, it's going to harm your emergence of your cash crop. So does that answer your question fairly well?
It does. If you want to have questions, I'll keep asking.
This guy had one over here.
Yeah, so, in terms of the conversations we have, I mean, obviously, you have a lot of, you haven't had 100% success rate, I assume, in terms of knocking on every door and everyone saying, come on in.
Yeah, no.
So just, in my context, we're up in Kansas Valley, it's a Park City, had this idea of doing a no-till tour, and like, if we're renting from the conservation district, we're about, just using their no-till, to just go down the street and talk to other neighbors and say, hey, I'll get a grant from somewhere, and we'll just no-till 2 acres through property, and you can observe. So if you focus only on yield, they'll probably be disappointed in the outcome. So I guess there's probably a spectrum, and maybe there's a journey along there.
Mm-hmm.
So what would, in the current context probably as well, what are the key drivers for someone to be willing to say yes, come inside and put it up in the first step?
What are the key drivers to convincing people to go down the soil health path?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Can I get something?
What's that? Yeah, I think the main avenue to talk to people and get them interested in trying different things is economics. I mean, everybody has their reasons. Some people are doing it for the environment, which is awesome. That's part of what drives me. Some people are doing it for climate change. That is also great. That's part of what drives me as well. But my biggest driver is I am passionate about agriculture, not just in Idaho, everywhere. And we can't continue to pay these input costs that we are. And this is a way that we can reduce our input costs. I'm not saying go organic at all.
Can I add to that? I think you have to understand why you're doing what you're doing now very, very well.
Yeah.
And assume, and no offense to the guys here, but it's not because they love tilling. I mean, yeah, there's people like to till. But that's not the decision making. I mean, farmers are brilliant, hardworking people. And so you have to understand why they're doing what they're doing
Yep.
now. And then I think create a path forward, taking into account the economics.
Yeah. So the reason we're doing how we're doing it now is this is how we've been taught in universities and from our forefathers. You know, they've been doing it this way since the Green Revolution, 70 years ago. Well, even before that, before the fertilizer came in, we were plowing because we didn't know any different. It's sort of like that revolution. You know, we've got to get the ball rolling. What's your question, Jed?
So, kind of a comment in line with this is when I have a question such as that, you don't have to jump all in here. It's not a matter of, I got to plant 9 species a day. What can you change? What's a small thing you can
Yep.
change? Can I reduce a pass? If I'm doing 3 passes, can I reduce it to 2 or 1 because I'm planting straight and I can plant straight into it? After watching some of these soils change over time, just because I have a trip tables or just as one, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
we started to know zone the trip tables because we're seeing our soils open up to black we're starting to see it change. But am I going to go into a soil that's got 0.1 organic matter and just start rolling? No, I'm not. I'm going to start working at it step by step. What's one thing that I can change? And how can I create a market maybe? A lot of these guys have just started growing trips and increased their water penetration on corn. And then now they're more interested in diversity because of these colonists. Okay, now I need to diversify and we'll start to see interseeds. And we may be turning around a little bit. As we've done it step by step, I've seen farms not go backwards anymore.
Yeah.
I've seen farms equalize their no-till to their conventional.
Yep. It goes back to just having a living root as much as you possibly can will benefit. Just a second. Or what's?
It's online, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, go ahead.
No.
What's the online question?
Oh, the online question says integrating livestock into farming systems shows benefits, but growers switching over it. It seems like there's a lot of barriers to entry. Would you comment on that?
There are barriers because for years we've been pulling fences out. So you've got to figure out your fencing quick. Another issue, like at Twin Falls there, it's on a very busy highway, and they're afraid of cattle getting out and getting hit. So that's why we did sheep, because you can manage them better. It is a barrier, and it's not going to work for everybody. But if you can possibly, at least with some animal that's easy to manage, it works. It helps. And I'm looking at you because you're my internet person. Now I can't remember. Oh, back to your getting those barriers. I look at some of these guys that adopted no-till in the 80s. They didn't jump in 100%. They took 5, 10, 20, whatever, however many acres they were comfortable with, and just committed that field, those amount of acres to it, and then learned along the way and brought the farm along with it. If they found a practice that worked for them, they increased the acres on it. And then on that original 5, 10 acres, whatever, they'd try something new, another practice. And once they perfected that, they moved it into the rest of the farm. And just, it's kind of like Jed was saying, that stair-step process, so that you're not making huge mistakes and costing the farm. Baby steps. We all walked before we could run.
Another aspect of that is, I think it's a great question. Guys are also going the other direction. They've done no-till for a while, and they're adding a field past, in a few years. The reason for that is the water penetration, and they take too much crop off. So and that's an economic decision.
Yeah. Maybe not the right decision. I mean,
Well, when you're paying $250 per head in your dairy, you want every drop you can off your crops. I think understanding those dynamics
Yeah.
is the answer to your
yeah.
question.
Well, and it goes back to many, many years of what we used to know. We used to think tillage was the only way to get water in your soil. And now we know that that creates more crusting, and it breaks up those porous structures and closes the soil off. But we used to think that that's how you got water in the soil. And now we're starting to learn more about it's
No
not.
question that tillage will help you get water in your soil in certain
Hmm.
conditions. It will. You're gonna argue that, and that's why farmers don't listen to it.
Yeah.
Because it works, but there are negatives, and I think that's your point. And so the journey forward is understanding those well and doing
Yeah.
it step by step.
So with that, we need to do more rainfall simulator demos and show exactly what you're talking. Take a soil that's been no-tilled for 10 years or more, and then work it once or twice and show that difference in infiltration.
One of the farmers who's been no-tilling for 10 years.
Yeah.
And they're adding a tillage pass. They're not doing it because they love to till. They're doing it because there's something wrong. They're seeing some yield limitations or something else.
Yeah, or not even a rainfall simulator, just take the infiltration rings and just disprove that common misconception.
Is there a challenge in the fact that if yield has been a priority, and I'd say for the last century, yield has been a priority, with net profitability, but it's maybe not sustainable. Because you're taking topsoil from the builder or alignment essentially, and degraded them in an accelerated rate. And so it's probably saying, in my head, it's, if you start with the soil health first, that will tell you sustainable yield. And unfortunately, I only have 8 years of living this life probably, and I might not see it get back to where that soil was in 100 years.
Yeah. A great example of chasing yield is these yield contests that we have across the country. You know, there was a guy in the Magic Valley of Idaho that won the irrigated wheat yield contest for the nation. I would hate to see what he put into that wheat to grow that crop. You know, what was his input cost? A guy that had 50 bushels less, he probably made more money. We're so ingrained in our pride towards yield. You know, I got 300 bushel corn. So what? What was your input cost versus the guy that maybe reduced his input costs, got a similar close enough yield, maybe he made more money. Let's start looking at our bottom lines and how much we're making per acre, not how much we're yielding per acre. When I was farming, heck yeah, I always wanted that yield because it was more fun to harvest, and I could go to the coffee shop and say, I kicked ass this year. But did my bottom line? No.
So I think you actually said it just perfect right there, because honestly, you come onto a farm, we're in this business with each other, there's not a good turn all the time.
Yeah.
If you go in there trying to explain your ecological benefits versus a decreased yield, most of your farmers look at you like you do. But you start talking about money per acre versus yield per acre, I think that's what's kind of opened
Yep.
the eyes. Because I think any of us that are full-time farmers, it's the economics that get you to fly on the direction.
Yep.
I mean, that's how I started.
Yep.
It was more just to have more places to graze cattle.
Yeah.
And that was it's still 95% of the reason I do certain things.
Yep. Do you?
You start seeing the other side, like honestly, even like what you're talking about, with the tilling to get, we do a lot of flooding. And our water system's set up that it's actually not acre feet, it's that you have the water for 42 hours and you use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the big, it's actually, I don't even know the answer yet. One of the big arguments I can hear is that, similar to what you said, is that we have to till after 7 years. I don't know if I agree with it, but that's the argument I hear.
Yeah.
Because it gets to the point that you have such good water take in that you can't get water down the drain. So
Yep.
your trade-off then is, you're getting more water in the drain.
You're telling to actually reduce the water infiltration.
I'm not, but that's one of the arguments, and it's a real argument. When you can get your water halfway down the field in 6 hours,
Yeah.
or you can get your water all the way down the field in 6 hours.
Yep. I can't remember where this example is, but this guy's a flood irrigator, and I can't remember where it was. I just read about it. Flood irrigator that started doing some soil health stuff and increased his infiltration rates on his soil. And it was a train wreck for him because he could not get water down to the end of the field. It soaked in so well.
In our region, I would say most farmers in the Severe Valley, Severe County, most guys
So,
And there are fundamental reasons that I think that's just soil and those kind of things. And it might be how we fertilize. There might be a lot of root causes, but until we get it though, it still gets to be quite painful. And so you start, so it's a step-by-step process. What is the way forward from here? I think is the right
yeah.
question.
So to follow up on what you're saying, like they'll go out and till to get that water infiltration. That's a short-term gain. And we as a people, we love to see immediate results. So you're going to get that water maybe in a little bit faster because I deep ripped, but the next year it's going to close back up again and you're going to have the same issue. So you're going to, well, I guess I got to rip again. But if you just continue on and have that mindset of, I am going to make this work, it will fix itself in time. But we've got to get through that. We've got to be okay with a slower result than just immediate. And that is the hardest part to get people, yeah. It's the hardest part to get people to believe in. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, lose some income for 5 years and then you'll be fine.
On that income part, I called, we applied for NRCS grants to reimburse us on our cover sheet costs this coming year. And it was our first year doing that, but I call it the methadone of slowly transitioning off of heroin or Oxycontin and glyphosate.
Yeah,
How do you pull back and it's a bridge loan.
yeah,
You know, the transition from-
yeah.
I don't know if that's a fair analogy.
Yeah, I think,
Are there other funds we should think about beyond that?
I'm not an NRCS guy, so I can't speak too much to that. But, yeah, but the thing that I always go back to when these guys are, wow, $30 an acre for a cover crop. Well, look at what's in that cover crop. Is it going to provide you enough nitrogen, or is it going to pull up some P and K that's deep in your soil that your plants can't get to? Is it going to bring it up to the surface where your plants can use it? Will you save that $30 seed cost in fertility cost the next year? I get people, they want to be paid for their cover crop seed because it eases the fear that this is just another cost onto a big list of costs in farms. But you've got to be looking at those opportunity costs of the money savings in the next cash crop. And that's a hard one to convince people of too, because they haven't seen the data that shows that actually works. So where are we at on time?
But I also think areas of regulation skills, right? When you find those kind of issues, right? You're kind of leading the way on the
All right, well, if there's more questions, I'll sit here. I love discussions like this, so we can keep going if you guys want, or we can shut her down. I do have a meeting at 11 that I have to be to. All right, if that's it, thank you guys. This was a great discussion.